Good morning, everybody. My name's John. I'm an alcoholic. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with you. I want to thank Eileen and the committee for inviting me. When I was drinking, nobody would have invited me to a dog show. And as Jimmy said earlier, you never know where sobriety is going to take you. If somebody had... early on in sobriety, an old timer said to me, John, if I asked you to write down on a pad with a pencil what you wanted out of sobriety, you would shortchange yourself so badly. It would be pathetic, because the way you are now, you can't think that well of yourself. And he was right. You hear a lot of cliches in AA about, things that can happen to you in sobriety, but when you're new, it's very difficult to believe, because it's so hard trying to stay sober. And you read these promises and you think they're for everybody else but you. And then as you stay sober for a while, you start to see these things come true, And that doesn't mean that because we get sober that we all tiptoe through the tulips. I don't know how a nice guy like me wound up in a place like this. I was born and raised on the west side of New York, around Columbus Avenue on 101st Street. It was an Irish neighborhood, and everybody drank there. All the fathers drank. They came home from work and they hit the saloons, and there were saloons on every corner. My father was a drunk, and he wasn't home very much. He was a bad drunk, and I knew I would never be like him. In fact, I swore I would never be like him. And if I've heard that once in AA, I've heard it a million times. Which tells me a lot about the disease of alcoholism. It has nothing to do with your resolve or what you think you're going to do. Once it puts the ring in your nose, it takes you where it wants to. And that's what happened to me. I never intended to become the person I had become as a drunk. And I didn't like myself, but I couldn't stop drinking. And any alcoholic in this room can identify with that. You don't come into AA because you're dancing through the tulips and everything's going fine. We come here, and I believe today, because we have a soul sickness, and I believe that this disease, I was more soul sick than anything, and I was very sick physically and mentally. But nobody ever told me that I had a spiritual illness until I came to AA. Nobody told me about reaching out to a power greater than myself and all the things that I heard in AA. And for some reason, for the first time in my life, I was willing to listen. And I didn't have all the answers anymore. I was the type of guy that had the answers before the questions were asked, and I paid a price for that. I didn't come into AA to gain humility or anything. I was humiliated by booze, and I think that humiliation sometimes brings some humility in your life. At least it did with me. I was willing to listen when I got here. And it was only through the grace of God that AA found me, because I didn't come looking for AA. I had long since given up on any hope of ever getting sober, because I had spent numerous months and days and weeks in rehabs and detoxes, and nothing worked for me. I picked up my first drink when I was 10, and the reason I remember that, I say my first drink, I probably had sips before that, but I got together with a friend of mine whose mother worked for Park and Tilford. Some of you old-timers in the room might remember Park and Tilford booze. They also made perfume and things like that, And I drank all that stuff somewhere down the line. But he stole a bottle of booze out of the house, and we went and bought a bottle of ginger ale, and we went around a corner in a hallway, and we started drinking it. And the next thing I remembered, I woke up at home in bed. The bed was spinning. There was puke all over me, and my mother was standing over me saying, Jesus, Mary, and Saint Joseph, he's only 10 and he's just like his father. But I was so sick, I swore I would never drink again, And lo and behold, I think maybe a couple of weeks later, I was with a couple of guys down in the corner, and we got some change together. We grabbed one of the winos on the corner. We had a lot of winos in my neighborhood. And we gave him enough to buy himself a pint, and we asked him to get us a couple of pints. And I drank that, got sick as a dog again. and wound up home puking my guts up. Now, I'm sure that if I ate a can of string beans and it got me sick, I wouldn't go back the next week and eat another can of string beans. But I'm an alcoholic, so I can't explain to you why I went out the next week and did the same thing again. But I did it. And I don't pretend to have the answer to that question. But I know that alcoholism is not a rational disease. If it was rational, none of us would be here. We'd say, I'm killing myself, I'll stop. You know? We keep going back doing the same things to ourselves, thinking that it's going to be different, and it never is. You know, and that's a hard concept for a drunk to get, because I don't like to admit the defeat to anything. Paradoxically, when we admit defeat, we get better. I continued drinking on weekends and finally got used to it, which I wanted to do because I wanted to be grown up and be like the guys and the older guys hanging out in the bars and all the fathers. And drugs started to show their face in the neighborhood. I was introduced to pot. When I smoked pot, I would try anything. Then I was introduced to heroin. I started snorting a little heroin. I'm introduced to a set of works. They told me if I skin popped, I'd feel better. And I tried that. And then they told me if I mainlined, I'd feel better. And I tried that. And I got hooked on heroin and hooked on booze. And for years I was drinking and using drugs and started to have to steal to support my habits. Wound up in a youth house in New York 3 or 4 times. And the last time in, they were sending me away. And my mother prevailed on the judge, who was a woman, to let me go to Ireland. She said that, she'd like to send me over to Ireland to see where she came from. And the judge thought it would be a great idea for a young kid from New York to go to Ireland, see his roots, and maybe straighten himself out. We were on welfare at the time because my father was a drunk, so my mother didn't have money to send me anywhere. I don't know how she got it, but somehow she got up. I think it was $150 at the time, and I went over on the Mauritania. They still had the big sailing vessels going over, and I got on that boat on a one-way ticket, and I was supposed to stay for a month, and I wound up staying there over a year because my mother didn't take me back, and I don't know if it was because she didn't have the money or because she didn't want to take me back home. But I drank on the boat going over on the ship. They had drinking and dancing and everything every night, and I liked that, So I got drunk every night, got seasick a little, but I continued drinking. I got off the boat in Cork, and my in-laws from my father's from Dublin and Kildare came all the way down to meet me, and my in-laws from Cork, where my mother was from, came to meet me, and they were fighting over who would have me first, because I was the first Yank to ever go back. They thought everybody didn't come back because they were so rich they were enjoying themselves. They didn't know they didn't have the money to go back. But they were fighting over who was going to take me, and in the end they were fighting over who was going to get rid of me after a year. I had an uncle, and now I was from the city, and I had never seen a cow or anything like that in my life. And here I went with my mother's people to Cork first, and they lived out on a farm near the ocean. My grandfather and my uncles were fishermen, but the fishing industry was over, and I had an uncle there who was a small farmer, and all the other brothers and sisters of my mother had left and spread throughout the world, and there were 12 of them. My grandmother was still alive, and she was blind. And my Uncle Tim never had a drink in his life. He took a pledge when he was a kid. They have a society in Ireland called the Pioneers. And so he had never drank, and he didn't smoke either. And by the time I left, he was drinking and smoking and carrying on. He had a little donkey and cart we used to take to town. And we used to stop in a pub, and we'd have a couple, and then, I'd tell them, I got to buy you one, then they'd buy us one, and we'd wind up staying in the pub all day. And we'd come out, and the poor little donkey used to take us home at night. He knew the way home. White Jack, his name was. It's funny the things you can remember. And that was our mode of transportation. because we had bicycles, but I could never rode a bicycle home by the end of the day. We used to get our supplies and just drink all day. And I enjoyed that. I liked drinking, you know. There was no drugs in Ireland, but that didn't matter to me. You know, I just liked drinking. So I went up to Dublin after a while to meet with my father's people, and all of my father's family are alcoholics. I had 3 uncles and an aunt, and they were all drunks. And I loved that too. And they loved me because I could drink with them. I used to go out with my uncle, and even as a kid, I had a big tolerance, and I was proud of that, you know. I'd belly up to them pubs with his friends and drink with them, play darts and rings and all that stuff. And he was proud of me. He said, Jesus, he says, you can put it away, you know. And I said, yeah, I know I'm some piece of work, you know. So I drank a lot in Ireland with my uncles, and my uncle that I was drinking with there died at 37 of alcoholism. You know, I have an aunt who died of it. My father died of it, and a lot on my mother's side are drunks too. But you know, whether or not this is hereditary is immaterial. You know, I know people in these rooms who nobody in their family ever drank, and they're here. You know. The fact is that we haven't. Well, anyway, I went back to Cork after I stayed in Dublin a while, and eventually, after 13 months, my mother decided time to bring me home. And we came to the airport with all my cousins seeing me off and everything, and I got drunk as a skunk at the airport, got on the plane, and I had 4 quarts of duty-free Irish whiskey with me to bring home to the family. And I got on the plane, I ordered a drink, and I ordered another drink, and the steward came by again, I ordered another drink, and he said, sorry, the bar is closed. And I said, what? Like, I panicked. You know, even at that age, booze was like the most important thing in my life, you know, and the panic, no more booze. And there was a girl sitting in the seat across the aisle from me, an Irish girl, and she heard me ask for the drink. And she said, I have a couple of nips in my bag here, if you'd like to have them. And I took them and I drank them, and then I was panicking more, so I reached down, I was opening up a bottle of the duty-free Powers Gold label. And she leaned over to me and she said, you know, if you open that up, she says, you won't be able to take it through customs. I said, don't worry about it. There'll be nothing in it when we get to customs. And there wasn't. I got off the plane at Idlewild Airport at that time, and my mother was standing there with my sister, and she took one look staggering off that plane, and she said, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, couldn't you stay sober even for the flight home? You know, and I said, I had a couple, Ma, you know. By this time I was 16. I had my peg pants on, my Hollywood suit, and Mr. B tie, collar with the duck's ass haircut. I was the sharpest thing since sliced bread. And right back to the same neighborhood, and got back in with the same crowd and started the same drinking again and started using drugs again. And it was like the story of my life. You know, I wound up getting addicted again to heroin and booze, and for years I was doing that, and stealing again to support my habits, and eventually wound up going to prison. I was sent to prison for 5 years, and while I was in there, I was taking my inventory, you know, and saying to myself, you know, I got to do the right thing when I get out of here, so I'll just drink, you know, I'll leave the drugs alone. And never dawned on me, you know, that I should stop drinking. That just never occurred to me. So when I got out, I went about drinking again, and I wound up in more trouble. I was a blackout drinker, and I used to get violent at times, especially with any kind of authority figures that were around. And I wound up in jails many times and didn't know what I was there for. I'd wake up in the back of a precinct in a cell and have no idea what it was, and that was scary, you know. So I decided that I was going to go back to using heroin to get away from alcohol. And I started using heroin again, and of course I didn't stop drinking, and I wound up hooked on booze and heroin for years. Spent another 3 years in prison. And again said, when I get out, I'll just drink on weekends. I won't, I went through all them shenanigans and the things that the gymnastics in our head, because I really didn't want to give up. I couldn't face life without drinking. I had done it for so long, Eventually, methadone program came about, and I went on the methadone program, and I thought that was going to be my savior. I wasn't using drugs anymore, but I continued my drinking. And while I was on the methadone program, there was the woman who started that program. Her name was Dr. Marie Nicewander, a wonderful woman, and a woman who cared, and her husband, Dr. Vincent Dole, who was the biochemist who came up with the formula for that. I didn't know it at the time, but he had been a Class A trustee on the board of Alcoholics Anonymous. Both of them knew Bill Wilson very well because they used to discuss addictions with him. And she knew all about alcoholism, she knew all about AA. And one day, I was up in the clinic getting my methadone, drunk as a skunk as usual. They had detoxed me 11 times from alcohol while I was on that program. And I went up there one day and I had my load on, and I wanted to know why I wasn't a counselor in this place. And I said, I have more experience than all these counselors here put together. I was dead serious, too. I told all and sundry and that I had more experience than all the counselors there put together, and I should have a job counseling these guys. And Dr. Nicewander came in, called me at the office and said, John, we might consider that if we didn't have to step over you every morning to open the clinic up. She said, you're a drunk. You're an alcoholic, John. I said, what? Christ almighty. I said, give me a break. I'm not using drugs anymore. I'm having a few. What, do you want to take everything away from me? And I was dead serious and angry that she would suggest this to me, And she said, John, she said, I can't stand by any longer and watch you killing yourself. She says, we've detoxed you numerous times, and she said, if you continue drinking, you're going to wind up with cirrhosis of the liver. And while I was going in and out of these hospitals, doctors were telling me that my liver was distended, and if I continued drinking, that I would eventually wind up with cirrhosis. And of course, I said, look at these guys trying to scam me. You know what I mean? What do they think? They're talking to some kid that just fell off the turnip wagon? I'm off the hard drugs. I'm having a few drinks. And it didn't register with me that these doctors didn't even know me. They had no interest in whether I was drinking or not, but they were telling me what was wrong with me. And so with this day, Dr. Nicewander told me she was putting me back in another hospital, Bernstein Institute, to have me detoxed again. Now, I had been detoxed in St. Clair's Hospital on the west side of New York. That's where the methadone program was. And they used to put me in there because they had no place else to put me. And I used to go in there and con the psychiatrists about what I needed, and I had had real good con game, I used to get paraldehyde 4 times a day. The old timers here will remember paraldehyde. They don't give it anymore because they found out it was toxic to the liver. But in the old days, it kept the winos and all the drunks from going into the DTs, and it stopped you from shaking and stuff. But you could smell it from across the room. And I conned the psychiatrist into giving me that 4 times a day, along with my 100 milligrams of methadone. And at night, I used to get 3 big jelly beans of chloral hydrate to sleep with. And then I conned him into giving me some Dalmane to help me dream so I could tell him why I drank. And I went up one day to get my daily medication, the first thing in the morning, my methadone and then my paraldehyde. And there was a new nurse on that morning, and she put a styrofoam cup up, and they had the paraldehyde was in vials. And she broke the vial and she poured it in, and she went, "Oh, Jesus, you drink that?" She said, "Do you want some orange juice?" I said, "No, I'll take it straight." And when she picked up the cup to hand it to me, the bottom fell out of it. And I said, "I have a special glass up there with my name on it." This poor nurse looked at me and says, "You actually drink this stuff?" I said, "I love that stuff, It did me some good. And I remember One time I checked in there too, and I had a knife with me. I was carrying a knife. I had these crazy fears and stuff, and they checked me into this room with another guy, and he seen me put my knife up under up under the side little dresser next to my bed. And there was a nurse, an old-time nurse there, who saw, when I came in, she said, "We're not giving this guy formaldehyde anymore. He's a con job, you know. He stays up till 3 o'clock in the morning watching the Late Show, smoking cigarettes, when everybody else is fast asleep, and he's got 3 times as much medication as anybody on the ward." So they gave me something else besides the formaldehyde, and I went into the DTs. And it seems I was going around, I didn't remember this, it was relayed to me later, I was throwing people out of their beds looking for my bottle under their mattresses. And they rang the riot bell or whatever they do there, and a bunch of guys in white coats came down and grabbed me, and they threw me into bed. And when I woke up the next morning, I was strapped down, face down. I was strapped with these big leather straps to the bed, and I found out they had shot me up with formaldehyde. And then it was relayed to me that the nurse who told me that I couldn't have the formaldehyde was the first one I hit. She came running down the hall, and I clocked her and a bunch of other people. They couldn't hold me down. I was ranting and raving. And eventually, you know, they gave me formaldehyde and kept giving it to me until I was detoxed. But this last time, Dr. Nicewander sent me to Bernstein Institute, where I had been before, another place where they detox you from alcohol and drugs and stuff. And when I went there, I went up to get my medication and my formaldehyde and everything else, and they only handed me 20 milligrams of methadone, and I said, I get 100. And they said, well, that's all we have here. I said, get my clinic on the phone. So they got my clinic on the phone, and my counselor got on. He says, John, don't get angry. I have something I have to tell you. And I said, what? He said, we've been detoxing you over the last year from the methadone. He says, you're being discharged from the program. Dr. Nicewander says that she doesn't want you on this program. Now, I never heard of anybody being thrown off this program. So I said, you've been doing what to me for the last year? I said, where's your medical ethics? You'll hear from my attorney. I said, unbeknownst to me, I've been being detoxed here. I didn't have a place to live at the time. And but the arrogance, you know. So eventually I signed myself out of Bernstein, and I said, now I can just drink. You know, I'm not on this methadone anymore, right there, and I'm free and clear. Thank God. Well, needless to say, you know, that didn't happen. The progression kept going on, and I got sicker and sicker and sicker. And my mother, I was winding up in a lot of different hospitals, and I was starting to bleed internally. I was hemorrhaging every day. But I could, if I got a pint of booze down, it would stop the bleeding, and I could continue for the rest of the day. You know, and I had this big pail of bile next to my bed with blood, and I accepted that as just part of the thing. Like I say, I knew in my heart that I was going to die a drunk because I couldn't stop. I think overall I was detoxed about 17 times, and I was in about 7 rehabs. And nothing ever worked. I spent 8 years in prison, and that didn't work. So you can't scare a drunk. You can't, but as I said earlier, I didn't know I had a spiritual illness until I came to AA, you know. And anyway, I was going along my merry way, drinking every day, morning, noon, and night. I didn't know at the time what alcoholic insomnia was, but I had it. I couldn't sleep. The only time I slept was when I passed out. And I would pass out and I'd wake up like a half hour later, start, you know, and have to reach down and get that bottle and suck on that bottle, boy, to give me that, just to know it was there, you know. I had to have that booze. The fear of running out of booze is the biggest fear I ever experienced in my life, man. You know, I had a supply. I protected my supply like a bear protects its cubs. You know, I had different ways to get it at 4 o'clock in the morning. I had liquor stores. I had bootleggers to go to. And there were times if I didn't have that and I didn't have the money, I went down to Broadway on 96th Street and kicked the liquor store window and it just took what I wanted. You know, desperate. I was a desperate kind of a person. And This one time, my mother used to take me into her place when I would come out of some of these places to help nurse me back to health, you know, because I was in real bad physical shape. And then my mother eventually died, and I stayed in her apartment, which was in an adult community apartment house in Manhattan. And nobody questioned my age in the place. I was rolling in and out of there. I looked like an old man. When I eventually got sober, the people in the rehab told me that when I got there, they thought I was about 64 years old. But I was hemorrhaging badly for a long time, but this one day blood was actually spewing out of my mouth. I mean, it was gushing. And I was trying to drink to stop the bleeding because that always used to do it, and it wouldn't stop. And I was disoriented, and I was staggering around this apartment. And it was it was like a studio apartment with a small kitchen and a bathroom and stuff. And the bed was right in the same room, and I couldn't find the bed. I couldn't find the bed. Now, that's pretty hard. But I was so disoriented, I was falling over the furniture, and the TV was on the floor. And I somehow or another, I got to the telephone. My mother had a phone in the house, and I called my sister who lived on Staten Island. And I never asked for help. I was the type of guy, it was very, very hard for me to ask anybody for help, but I told her I was really sick. Could she come in? And she came rushing in with my brother-in-law, and they came up to the apartment. And today, you know, sometimes I think that the people around us could tell our stories better than we can. And she said, John, when I walked into that door, now she had seen me in bad shape when I was using drugs and strung out on heroin. One time I weighed 108 pounds. I had an infection running through my body, and she took me into her home and nursed me back to health. And this time she walked in, I was 240 pounds, suffering from malnutrition. So it wasn't from eating. I had cirrhosis of the liver. I was yellow as a canary. And she said, you were sitting on the bed with blood from one end of the house to the other, a pail of blood next to the bed, blood all over the sheets. She said, you made the lost weekend look like a fairy tale, you know. And she said, you were sitting on a bed, black and blue, from the top of your head down to your toes. Big black and blue marks and yellow as a canary. And she said there were bottles from one end of the house to the other. And in some places they were in designs. I'd like to think they're circles and triangles. But she took me, her and my brother-in-law took me and brought me out to Staten Island and took me to a hospital, an emergency room. And I was in St. Vincent's Hospital in the emergency room. And I hemorrhaged again and passed out, and they didn't know what to do with me there, and they called for an ambulance, and they took me to another hospital called the Old Staten Island Hospital on Staten Island. And I woke up in there, and I was in a very, very dark place. I didn't know where I was. I was still disoriented. And I heard a woman's voice in the distance. I heard a phone ring, and I heard a voice say, I see you. And then about 3 or 4 minutes later, I heard the phone ring again, and I heard a woman's voice say, I see you. And it goes to show you that an alcoholic can have a resentment on his deathbed. I said, is this a new fancy schmancy way of answering the phone? Instead of saying hello, I see you? How could she see anybody on the telephone? I remember thinking this to myself, you know. Jesus. I see you. Fancy schmancy. And I must have started a little bit because a nurse came over and she said, Mr. Grant, do you know where you are? And I said, no. She says, you're in Staten Island Hospital. I see you. And when I opened my eyes, I seen the blood. I had intravenous. I was hooked up to blood transfusions for all kinds of transfusions. When I was hooked up to I had tubes in my nose pumping blood out of my stomach. And I found out later that they told my sister and my brother-in-law that they didn't think I was going to make it through the night because I had lost so much blood. My brother-in-law said when he went into the room downstairs in the emergency room that there was a pail on my chest and they were taking it, and it was overflowing with blood. And they said, keep his sister out of here. this guy is in bad shape, you know. And then, of course, because I was yellow and everything, eventually they did a liver biopsy and told me I had cirrhosis of the liver. Had a touch of pancreatitis and a touch of a lot of things. My hair was falling out. I thought it was from old age, you know. There were a lot of things wrong with me physically. And one day they wheeled me down in a wheelchair, and they were going to do an isotope brain scan on me because they thought I had brain damage. A lot of my friends still think I have brain damage, but they thought that I had what they call Wernicke syndrome. Now, I only learned these terms after I came out of that. Wernicke syndrome is a precursor to a wet brain. There's Wernicke syndrome, which is reversible, and then there's Korsakoff syndrome, which is a wet brain that's irreversible. It happens from drinking. And there are many guys and girls out in Central Islip sitting in diapers who don't know who they are because they drank too much. And this doctor, because I couldn't answer his questions and my short-term memory was gone, he thought that I had Wernicke syndrome. And he wanted to do this isotope brain scan on me. I didn't know. I went down. This guy came at me with a needle this big. And I said, "What are you doing with that?" And he said, "Well, we have to shoot you up with this dye so we can do this test." And I said, "Not this kid." I said, "You're not using me as a guinea pig." He says, "Well, I'm only the technician here." And I said, "Take me back upstairs." So I went back upstairs, and the doctor eventually came in, and he said, "John, why did you refuse the test?" He says, "We're trying to help you here, you know." And I said, "Well, to be honest with you," I said, "I really don't want anybody fooling around with my brain." And he started laughing. And he said, "John, we're only trying to help you." He says, "We're concerned that because of your memory loss and stuff that you have what we call Wernicke syndrome." And I said, "Well," I said, "I have a feeling that I'm being used as a guinea pig, and I'm not going to allow that." So anyway, he called up some neurologists who came up to look at me and stuff, and I was in real bad shape. They were tying me in a chair with a sheet when they changed the sheets on the bed so I wouldn't fall out of it. I couldn't stand right. I couldn't walk right. And then, I don't know if you've ever seen the winos and stuff that have that gait like a drunken sailor, you know, the legs come high and everything. That's how I was walking, and they thought that I had brain damage done to my brain cells. But anyway, I still to this day don't know how long I was in that hospital because time didn't mean anything to me. I hadn't worked in 15 years. I stole most of my life to support my habits and stuff, and I'm really not proud of that because that's not the way I was brought up, but that's the way it was. So time didn't mean anything to me. I didn't have any jobs to worry about or anything like that, and eventually the doctor, after I was there a couple of months, I guess it was, and they treated me as best they could, and he told me that I was lucky that I survived, that most of the people who had what I had didn't make it, and they filled out papers for me to collect Social Security disability. And they sent the papers out, the social workers in the hospital, and the papers came back, and I had never worked long enough to collect Social Security. And the doctor said, "Where have you been all your life, John?" You know? So they had to put me on SSI, and they made my sister my guardian because they said that I was incapable of handling my own affairs. A sharp guy like me, incapable of handling my own affairs. But my sister told me later that the papers I had filled out looked like a 3-year-old filled them out. He couldn't understand what was going on. I had letters backwards and everything, you know. And in my sick head, I thought I was getting over on them. I thought I was going to collect a digit for the rest of my life and retire. When I left that hospital, the doctor said you have to stay in bed for 6 months. You have to go on a special diet, high protein diet, because you can't eat fats and stuff when you have cirrhosis. And I had nowhere to go. I had lost the apartment. I had lost everything. I had lost my family. I had gotten married too, which I neglected to talk about. It didn't last very long. I had 2 children. And I wound up... my sister took me into a home on Staten Island, and she was going to nurse me back to health. And they gave her all these medications to give me the folic acid and the vitamin B and a whole lot of things they gave me to take to build up my blood, to build up my liver, build my body up. And told her to put me on this high carbohydrate diet. and I went to her home on Staten Island, and I don't know if it was 2 days later or 3 days later, but a short time later, I remember they had to go out one day to do some food shopping, and as soon as they left, I got out of the bed and got dressed, and I was going out to get a drink, but I was conning myself. I said, I won't get the hard stuff. I'll just get blackberry brandy. I'll just get 2 pints of blackberry. And then I said, I'll just get 1 pint. I'll do the right thing, And when I left, the doctor said to me, if you take another drink, John, you're a dead man. He says, your body cannot metabolize alcohol anymore. Your liver's shot, your pancreas is on its way out. I had burnt the lining off my stomach, too. That's why I was hemorrhaging so badly. The portal vein was severed. Just a whole lot of stuff, man. And I got dressed, and I could barely walk, and I knew where the liquor store was on Staten Island because I had visited my sister a couple of times, and I was walking. And as I was walking, I was talking to myself, like, should I just get a pint? Should I get 2 pints? I knew it was sick. There was a part of me knew that this was very sick, but the obsession overtook it. The obsession was stronger than anything. The obsession to drink is the strongest obsession, the strongest thing I've ever encountered in my life, except AA. And I went down to this liquor store, and I went in, and I said, give me 1 pint of blackberry, I said. And I was proud of myself. I didn't order 2. And I came out of the store, and I was putting the bottle in my pants. I was a classy kind of a drinker, And I heard a car horn beep, and I looked over, and it was my sister and brother-in-law. Oh, Jesus. Do you know the indignities of a drunk man? I knew that this was sick. I knew that this was like pathological. And yet, I couldn't help it. So I walked over to the car, and I said, hi. I figured maybe they didn't see the bottle. And the liquor store was blinking over my head, I'll never forget my sister. She looked up at me and she said, John, are you insane? Are you insane? You just came out of an intensive care unit. What are you doing? And I said, is that all you two got to do is follow me around? The drunk. The best defense is a good offense. And I went around the corner and drank that pint and went to a bar or something. And the next thing I remembered, I woke up on her living room floor the next day. She said, John, I want you out. She said, I seen Ma die 8 months ago, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you die. So I said, well, then give me my money, my checks. She was my guardian getting my SSI checks. And she had about 2 of them there or something, She says, how much do you want? I said, I want it all. And I left there and went into the city and continued drinking that day. And I don't know how long later I wound up in French Polyclinic Hospital in a detox. And the guy there says to me, if you continue drinking, you're going to die. I said, tell me something I don't know. I said, I can't stop. Don't you understand? I can't stop. If I could, I wouldn't be in this shape. I can't. I wish I could. And you know something? You really have to be an alcoholic to understand why you can't stop. Because any person who's not an alcoholic looks at you and says, why would you continue doing this to yourself? And the alcoholic, we don't have any explanation for it. That's the sad thing. We don't know why. People think we're lowlifes and we want to do that. Believe me, I didn't want to be where I was. And yet the obsession was so insane. You talk about insanity. Man, I can feel it now in my heart, that insane obsession when I wanted to do the right thing and couldn't. And anyway, he said, there's a new rehab on Staten Island, because I gave a Staten Island address called South Beach Psychiatric Center. He says they have an alcohol rehab in there. It just opened up. He says, I'll give you a letter. He says, maybe you can, try that when you get out of it. So I got out of the hospital and went straight to the liquor store, and that right up to the block from French Polyclinic, and I got a couple of pints of blackberry. I stayed with the blackberry because I didn't want to hurt the cirrhosis, A good alcoholic doesn't hit the hard stuff when he's got cirrhosis in the liver, And I went up to this old neighborhood, 49th Street and 10th Avenue, where my old methadone program was, the one I was thrown off of. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe I was looking for somebody to talk to or whatever. And a guy was drunk, and I remembered it started to rain out, and I woke up on a stoop around a corner from there, and I was shivering cold. I was shaking, and I was soaking wet. I had a suit on, too. I always tried to keep a good front up, you know. Stealing. I needed good suits on so I could go out and steal the way I wanted to. But I got up from that stoop, and I think at that point, when I woke up on that stoop, I had reached a spiritual bottom, or whatever it is you want to call it, you know, and I again called my sister on Staten Island, and she said, come on out. And somehow I got down to the ferry, and I got on the ferry, and she came and she picked me up. I didn't get off the ferry twice. I was sleeping. The ferry went back and forth a couple of times, and she told the guy in the ferry, would you please, is there a guy sleeping? She said, does he have an eye out to here? She said, that must be him. I had fell somewhere down a cellar, and I had my eye was out to here, bloodshot. And she took me into a house, and the next day I woke up with this letter that this guy had given me, and I went down to this place called South Beach Psychiatric Center. I went in. They gave me a breathalyzer, and I failed it. And there were two nurses there, and I don't even think they were alcoholics, but they went to bat for me and said, you know, this guy is in bad shape. If we don't, you know, what are we in business for if we can't take him in? You know, do we want them coming in here in tuxedos? This guy needs it more than anybody we've ever seen. So there was a new psychiatrist there, they said, who took a shot. He said to me, do you have any history of seizures or anything like that? And I said, oh, no. No history of anything like that, you know. And he took a gamble with me. Now, I'm going to tell you something. This doctor, no doctors take a gamble like that, because if I'd have went into seizures or something because I was drinking, he could have gotten into a lot of trouble. You're supposed to be detoxed before you go to a rehab. So somewhere or another, God's hand was in this thing, because this guy didn't even know me. He took me in, and that night I was laying in my room very tired and sick. When you have cirrhosis, you are tired, man. And they came into my door and they said, AA meeting. And I said, I'll pass on that. Sharp guy like me, I don't want any Bible thumpers thumping on my head. I'm sick. And they said, no, you have to go. It's part of the curriculum here. And I said, I'm too tired. I said, I'm sick, can't you see? So the head guy came in and he said, if you don't go to this AA meeting, you have to sign out of here. Sign out. I had nowhere to go. Sharp guy like me, nowhere to go. So I got up and I staggered out to this AA meeting. Two guys came in to share their experience, strength, and hope with us. One guy was a little Italian guy with a red Coca-Cola T-shirt on. And, of course, I took his inventory right away. What is this guy going to tell me? You know, and then there was another guy who was a pretty nice-looking guy, and this and that. And they both sat up there and they shared their experience, strength, and hope. And for some reason, you know, I got a spark of hope, you know. And after the meeting, I had a pair of sunglasses on to hide this shiner I had. Oh, it was the worst shiner I ever had in my life. And this little Italian guy came up to me after the meeting, and he put his arms around me and he hugged me. You know, and man, I stiffened up like a board. You know, where I came from, men didn't hug you, you know what I mean? They'd clock you in the bar or something, but they didn't give you hugs, you know. And, you know, I was like a little leery of them. But then he said to me, John, he says, you know, you never have to do this to yourself again. He says, if you follow our path, you know. And for some reason, then all the bravado and all the machismo and everything else went out of me, you know. And he said, I love you. He said he loved me because I was a drunk. And he said, you never have to do it again, John. He said, if you go to meetings when you get out of here. And that guy carrying that message to me and hugging me, and I needed somebody to love me that night. I needed somebody to care. You know, I really had reached that point where it didn't matter anymore about the front I had to keep up, you know. I was spiritually at my bottom. And this man came to me, and I believe that they were both sent there by God, you know. There were 25 of us in that rehab. And of course, I was the worst one there, sickest one there. And at my first AA anniversary, the counselors from that place came to my anniversary with a gift for me, and they said, "John, you taught us a lesson. Out of all the people that were in there, we never thought you were the one who was going to stay sober, and you were the only one who did out of the whole 25. You know?" So this guy, Carmine, told me, to go to bed. And while I was in the rehab there, I went to every AA meeting I could get my hands on, and they used to take us out on Saturday night in a van to this other meeting. And while I was in there, I had to, I got a letter that I was thrown off SSI because I was cured for some reason. And I had to get on welfare and stuff. And while I was in there, they gave me passes to get out. I was supposed to be there for 28 days, and they kept me for 9 weeks because of my condition. And then I had to find a place to live and all of that. And they gave me passes to go out, and passes to go to the welfare office and this and that. And I finally got a place. Welfare at that time was $52.50 a week I got. So it was hard to find a place. So I found a roach-infested place on Staten Island, and no furniture. My sister gave me a bed, a folding cot she had in her garage, and a bureau. I think it had 3 legs on it. I had a can of Rangold under the other leg. But and when I left there, after the 9 weeks, they told me to try to make 90 meetings in 90 days. And I went to over 300. Not because I'm a nice guy or through any altruism. It's because I was so afraid of being by myself that I was going to drink that I had to know where the next meeting was I was going to. And I had no car, and I had no phone. So when people come to me today and say, "Oh, I can't get to meetings because," I said, "You're talking to the wrong guy. You are talking to the wrong guy, because if you want to get sober, you're going to go after it." The way they told me, go after it the way you drank. And they said, if you put 10% into staying sober, that you put into drinking, you'll be a success. So I took buses and trains and walked and did what I had to do. But I was at every meeting I get my hands on. Some nights I used to go into Manhattan on the ferry to the midnight meeting because I didn't want to be alone. And I really didn't know anybody on Staten Island. But as I went to meetings, I continued to meet people. And as time went by, I got a little better. Eventually, I celebrated a year. Man, I was flying that first year. I couldn't believe it, Neither could my sisters, my family, My sister picked me up for my AA meeting that night. She said, "Ma would really be proud of you tonight." And a day at a time, I was able to start going to work for guys in the program, taking menial jobs and things like that. I went to school. I got a high school diploma. I went to college for a while and did some things there. Became a stationary engineer. Then got out of that. Went into counseling for a while and got burned out in that. I was not good at counseling. I was 12-stepping people, wanting to kill them, and wanting to kill the administration people more. But I'm glad there are a lot of AA members in the field, because if they weren't there, they'd really be in trouble. But anyway, all the things that they started to, that they talked about, and told me about that would happen if I stayed sober, the things I didn't believe began to happen, I started to get better physically and mentally and spiritually, and eventually, like I said, I started getting these jobs and holding down jobs. I didn't think I could be responsible. But you know how I got responsible? I got responsible by being active in AA, making coffee and stuff, because I used to show up. I didn't think I could go to a job, 9 to 5. That's for them stiffs, you know what I mean? I can't be a 9 to 5 guy. Sharp piece of work like me. But by making the coffee and being there to get it, and I used to have to take 2 buses because I didn't have a car. I had the milk and stuff, and I'd be saying to the bus, "Oh, don't they move? They don't know I got to open this meeting up, traffic." And I started to meet the people before the meeting, so when I got up to open the meeting, I didn't feel so nervous. I could read the preamble and things like that, and all the little things, Eventually I got a learner's permit to drive. I never drove in my life because I came from Manhattan. And then I got a license, and I went to school, and all the little increments were always all a step up for me, And about a week after I was out of South Beach, I just want to tell this story because it's important. A week after I got out, I was laying on my folding cot down in this place called Daniel Low Terrace. The roaches were free. The wildlife was free. And believe me, when you turn the lights on, man, there were millions of them all over the place, And A knock came on the door this morning. I get up and I looked through the peephole, and it was the superintendent. And I said, oh, he probably wants to talk to me because I'm a new tenant. And I opened the door, and two detectives and a cop came flying through the door. Are you John Grant? I said, why? We have 2 outstanding warrants for your arrest. Oh, Jesus. How did they find me out here? You know, a nice guy like me. So, get dressed. Okay, I got dressed, and I grabbed the little 24-hour book they had given me as a gift when I left South Beach Psychiatric Center, and I put it in my pocket with the preamble, a little 12 and 12 with the preamble on it. Guy said, what's that? The cop says, you know. I said, it's a book, a spiritual book. He said, all right. So they take me out in handcuffs. All the neighbors are around. And they take me down to court. I had these warrants from Manhattan that were outstanding for a while, and I still to this day don't know how they found me on Staten Island, but they did. And I went to court, and they set a bail on me, and the Tombs was closed, so they sent me to Rikers Island. Now, it wasn't really a bail at that time. It was a ransom for me. You know, there was nobody in my family would bail me out. In fact, my mother one time said to me, and today I realize how painful it was for her to say this. She said, John, she said, it's a terrible thing for me to have to say this to my only son, but the only time I have any peace of mind or get any sleep is when you're in jail. You know, and I didn't realize how much pain she was in because of what I was doing, you know, but today, sober and being a parent, I know how hard that must have been for her. But anyway, nobody ever bailed me out anymore, and I don't really blame them. So I was over on Rikers Island, and I came back to court for a hearing on the charges, and my sisters had gotten together and took a loan out to bail me out because they knew I was trying to stay sober. And they bailed me out from court. The bail was lowered, and I walked out from court. And my first thought was to go across the street to the bar to celebrate and have a few. You know, it's so sick, this disease. I was going to go over. And then I remembered what I heard at the meetings. You don't drink if your ass falls off, you know. And if it does, pick it up, bring it to a meeting. And at the time, it sounded a little corny, you know, but these little things saved my life in many instances. I came back to Staten Island and went right down to a meeting, and I shared what was going on. And I had this old-time sponsor of mine, Iron Mike, and the name suited him, boy. I was telling him I got locked up, I'm facing time, and after the meeting he says to me, get down on your knees and thank God you got here alive. Never mind feeling sorry for yourself. He says, you know, he says, the right action will take place in your life if you continue to stay sober and keep coming to these meetings. He says, don't bend that elbow. That elbow is your problem. Everything else is immaterial. Don't bend that elbow no matter what. And, you know, that's what I had to hear for that day, you know. So by going to a lot of meetings, you're always in the path of probability. I went back to court. I did the right thing. One case was dismissed for lack of evidence. And the other one I plea bargained down to a misdemeanor with the stipulation I couldn't get more than a year. And they continued my bail while I waited for sentencing. I went back for sentencing with 2 friends from AA, caught in a Pall Mall, tube of Pepsodent and a toothbrush. And I said, I'll see you in about 10 months if I get the good time. I went before the judge, and the judge asked the district attorney if he had anything to say. And then he asked my lawyer, do you have anything to say? And he said, no. And I said, what do you mean you got nothing to say? Said, legal aid, you know, he's selling me down the tubes. I can't afford my own lawyer. I said, I have something to say. He said, shut up a minute, you know. And then he says to the DA, do you have anything to say? He says, no, Your Honor. I nearly fell over when the DA had nothing to say because my sheet was horrible. I'm not proud of that sheet. But normally they ask for the max. He said, no, Your Honor, I have nothing to say. And then I said, well, I have something to say, Your Honor. And I started, and the lawyer says, keep quiet. So I said, all right. And the judge said, I sentence you to a year in a penitentiary. And I said, well, I expected that. And then in his next sentence, he said, I suspend sentence with the stipulation you continue going to AA. Holy Christ. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I hadn't walked out of a courtroom in 25 years. And was not supposed to walk out. No way. There was no way. The deal was made. I was lucky to get the deal I got. never mind walk out. And I had been to the pre-sentencing to this probation officer. It was she was a Swedish woman. She had an accent, and I was talking to her about AA. And I told her, I said, you know, I found something that's going to change my life. And she said, really, what's that? And I told her about AA. And by the time I left, she asked me if I could have if she could have the little 12 and 12 I had in my pocket. And the lawyer said to me afterwards, he says, I don't know who you know in the probation department, but they wrote such a glowing report that I knew you were going to walk today. I said, man, I can't believe it. I tell you, I turned around, I walked out of that courtroom, and I floated out. And I already had been making a lot of meetings, and I believed in what was happening, but that reinforced what they were telling me, that if you did the right thing, that a power greater than yourself would be working in your life, you know? And that was concrete proof to me that God, or power greater than myself, was working in my life. There was no way I was supposed to walk out of that courtroom. And I came back to AA with a bigger vengeance than ever. I have always made it the most important thing in my life. Again, not from altruistic reasons, because I have to if I don't want to drink. And I've been fortunate enough that I love AA. I never got tired. And believe me, I'm a fair study. Nothing holds my interest very long. You know, I'm gifted that AA has held my interest, you know. Because just when you think you got it together, the rug gets pulled out from under you anyway. And you realize you don't have anything together. But I want to end this by saying that, you know, some of the things that happened to me in sobriety, unbelievable. Not only I wound up going to work for the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous after I was sober for 11 years. And if anybody would have told me that I would have wound up working for the outfit that saved my life, you know, and there were like 98 people applying for the job from all over the country. They were flying people in for interviews, were being recommended by trustees and delegates and everything, and I didn't know a soul. I got there by accident. I happened to be in Rutgers University studying to be a counselor, and I ran into somebody who worked there. And she said, gee, you'd be a good person up at the office. I said, I've never even been to GSO. I was ashamed to say it. But anyway, she called me up a couple of weeks later and said, why don't you fill out an application? And I filled out the application. I told them the truth. I said, you know, I did a lot of time in jail. I've been in and out of hospitals, you know. And they said, you're perfect for the job. We'll start you out on the corrections desk. And then we'll put you on a treatment facility desk. Of course, there's a lot more to the job than that, but I wound up traveling all over the world. I was in Russia carrying the message for AA and trying to help people over there, translating literature in Eastern Europe, South America, Western Europe, all over the United States and Canada. You know, and how do you get there from park bench? You know, you have to be in AA to understand this. You know, and where would anybody hire me? I thought I'd never get off welfare. I had no skills. Locks and alarms, maybe, you know. But, you know, and I left that job, and I'm working on another job now, and I stayed there 10 years, and it was time for me to move on. You know, my two daughters got in touch with me after I was sober about 15 years. I have a wonderful relationship with them, and lo and behold, all surprises of surprises, I have a little 2-year-old of my own now, who's an uncle to my two daughters in their 30s, my grandchildren, you know. It's all screwed up, but... and my first son, and my name was going to die with me because there's no other males in the family, you know, including my cousins and stuff. So he came along, and he's the love of my life, you know. And just another gift of sobriety. And again, I want to thank the committee for having me here this morning, and... I hope that if anybody new here is having a hard time, that they continue coming. This thing works. Believe me. Thank you.